Welcome back to Campo di Bella podcast. My name is Mark.
I'm Marianne, and we're here from, as you said, Campo di Bella, and we're doing our
Did you forget where you were?
No, I knew where I was. Anyway, we are going to here this week talk about a couple different things, but mainly we're going to talk about making homemade rustic Italian bread.
Yep, we're going to discuss how we make bread on the farm and go from there, and maybe a few other varieties of bread that we make as well. So, but what's been going on this week?
I don't know. It's just been cold and snowy and cold and snowy. And that's about it.
Yeah, so we got about probably another 1 to 2 inches yesterday. I wasn't expecting that. But we had to go pick up your car at the Toyota dealer after it stopped working for me on the way back from work on Wednesday. So on Wednesday, I was able to get maybe a mile or two out. Then I started getting all those warning lights on the car that something was wrong. And then it stopped accelerating. And so I just kind of went straight to the Toyota dealer and dropped it off there, and you and Massimo came to pick me up, and we went home and then picked it up the next day when they said I think some type of, it's the throttle, but what component of the throttle, I don't know, got frozen. And after they kept it inside for a while, it was fine. But I've never had a throttle freeze on a car in my lifetime. So I don't know, maybe too much technology.
Well, this, for the Belazzinis, is the most technologically advanced car we've owned. So it could also be we're just idiots. We're not doing it.
I know this is kind of sacrilege that I'm saying this, but maybe too much technology is a bad thing. So,
who, you're saying this? No. Yes. So we have a hybrid car now, and so that is our newest challenge here on the farm: is how to keep the hybrid car from dying.
Well,
and we just got it 3 months ago.
Yeah, so. It kind of does what it wants.
Yeah.
But we had to get rid of the other two. The truck was dead. The transmission was dead. So we finally had to get rid of the farm truck. And your Honda just died too. So we had 2 dead cars on the farm.
In the farm field.
In the farm field.
And it was, we needed another viable car.
Yeah.
So
anyway, we're getting a little bit off topic, so we should get back on the topic of bread. So what kind of bread do we make?
I don't know what kind of, just rustic Italian bread. That's all I know what it is. I mean, does it have a name, like a special name?
No, I think rustic Italian bread is fine. So how long have we been making bread?
Well, at least since we opened the restaurant 5 years ago.
We've been making it longer than that. We've been making
we've been making it for ourselves, but we haven't been selling it to customers or offering it at the wine house, except for when we opened the winery. And we started with the focaccia bread, and then you started dabbling in the rustic Italian bread, and then we made it weekly.
Yeah. So what kind of inspired us to make the bread? So when was the trip to California? To San Francisco?
5 years ago. Our 20th wedding anniversary.
Okay, so we were probably making bread before that, but...
Well, we played around with, like, bread machines and homemade bread.
Yeah, we no longer use a bread machine.
But not on a weekly basis. No. We weren't making bread regularly. Just like every now and again, you would make a loaf of bread. Oh, what's the new bread that you've, like... the one that looks like a big pizza... that you got, like...
So all these are coming from... So we made bread before this, but the bread that we make right now is kind of inspired by somebody named Chad Robertson. And he's one of the founders of Tartine Bakery in San Francisco. He's got more than one location now. But I think when we went to San Francisco, it was kind of a pilgrimage to go to Tartine Bakery. And what did we do there?
That and Bouchon Bakery. Yeah. Like we turned into foodies quite a few years ago, and now our vacations are based on where we can get the best food and get the best of something. And so, yes, our trip out to California was based on wine and bread and bakery. Yeah, right?
Yeah, but I think we bought the Tartine bread book way before we...
Oh, your Tartine bread book is well worn. It's something that you've used nonstop for quite a while.
Yeah, I think that's what brought me to the level that we're at right now as far as the bread making. And we kind of had to go to Tartine. And we actually, I think, had to wait in line.
Oh, we did.
Outside.
Yeah.
So,
there's always a line there.
And then I snuck into the kitchen a little bit.
Yeah. It's a very small place. And so it reminds me of the Chicago bakeries where they just have a very small storefront. You go in, you take a number, and then you place your order, and the girl boxes up the cookies or the pastries, and then you're sent on your way. But Tartine is also known for its bread. So there are just beautiful baskets of bread everywhere. And then there's like a little bit of this open area in the back going towards the bathroom. And I think I came out of the bathroom to tell you that there was bread on the table and the ovens were open. And that's when you snuck a peek in the back to take pictures of the bread on the table. I had to
sneak a little bit behind the counter to get a photo, but
I was going to say, you were not,
And then we sat outside, we got a baguette, we got a bunch of other stuff.
We got some pastries and a baguette.
Yeah, and we sat outside and just ate the warm baguettes, and it was great. So then we went on another adventure up north to Bouchon and everything. Well, that's another podcast. Yeah. So anyway, so bread baking for us is a little more complicated. It's not like we can do this in a few hours. It's a week-long process. We started off with making our own starter. If you want to call it a sourdough starter, you can, but it's just a natural farm starter. Probably when we got here, maybe it's the starter is probably over 10 years old right now.
Okay. I'm trying to think of like when you started the starter and we had to keep nurturing it. I don't know that it was 10 years old, but it's definitely more than 5 years. So, yes.
So just to cover a little bit of the basics of bread baking and the science behind bread baking so people can understand the process a little bit more. So all bread is essentially water, flour, yeast, and a little bit of salt. And there's the process of fermentation, which has kind of two components. There's a fermentation by yeast and a fermentation by bacteria. The fermentation by yeast is what converts the sugars, the carbohydrates, and everything else into carbon dioxide and alcohol. So the yeast actually produce alcohol during the fermentation process and CO2. So CO2 is what gives the bread that kind of, it causes the expansion, it causes the bread to rise because the gas that's produced is entrapped within the bread dough and it's forming all these little microcells and expanding. And then when you actually put the bread in the oven, that gas is trapped within those little cells. And of course, if you increase the temperature, the gas expands and it kind of pushes things. That's why the bread gets nice and puffy and rises that way. And there's the other part of, are you following me so far or no? Or am I getting you bored?
Yeah, no, keep going.
Okay. So the other part of fermentation is not just yeast. It's also bacteria. And the main, there's probably tons of different bacteria in there in a natural starter. But there's another bacteria, the category is lactobacillus. And the lactobacillus also converts the sugars and carbohydrates into lactic acid and other organic components and other acids as well. So that's what decreases the pH and actually gives the bread its acidic flavor or sour flavor or sourdough flavor. So the longer you ferment the bread, the longer you keep the starter going, the more flavor will be produced and the more sour the dough will be because you're actually just allowing the bacteria to break down the carbohydrates and produce those flavor compounds and the other components. Are you asleep or what are you doing?
No, I'm awake. I'm listening. I'm just thinking of questions I want to ask when you're all said and done.
Okay. So, and then the kind of other component to it is gluten. So with the bread flour and the water, gluten is formed and gluten becomes stretchy. So when the CO2 forms, instead of popping, the bread doesn't, those little cells and those little spheres don't pop. They have to become stretchy or elastic. So instead of, if the gluten is well formed, those cells will expand and not pop and create that kind of beautiful crumb that's within the bread.
Within it or on the outside of it?
No, within the bread. So the
airiness?
The airiness, yeah. So if you cut through a piece of bread and you see all those little air pockets in there. That's due to the gluten formation and the CO2 that's expanded and created those pockets. And I really like to see different size pockets because I think it just looks nicer instead of a tighter crumb and what's called a more homogeneous crumb where everything looks the same.
Like white bread.
Like white bread, yeah.
Okay.
So this is more rustic peasant style bread. I just thought of something. So what about our bread oven in Italy?
What bread oven in Italy?
In Solietta.
Yeah, we've never used it.
We've never used it, but I remember as a kid in our apartment in northern Tuscany that my family owns, we own now, there was a bread oven. And I think as a kid, I remember people baking bread in there and smelling bread growing up and going there over summer. But right now it's just kind of a storage facility, and I don't think it's been used in years and years and years. So, and what about so we said that our starter, we've had it on the farm.
So wait a minute, explain to them where do you store the starter? Like
this starter is stored in the fridge, but there's a process. So we've had the starter for about 12 years, and it needs to be refreshed on a weekly basis. So otherwise, it would kind of go dormant and go bad. Although we have stored it in the fridge while we're on vacation, and come back, and it's taken a little while to wake it up because you have to go through the process of feeding it, which I'll get into in a little bit.
Oh, sorry.
So, as I mentioned before, let's start off with just kind of the timetable of what we do. So we make the starter on Thursdays, and we refresh the starter on Thursdays, and then let it rise and put it back in the fridge on Fridays.
What does refresh the starter mean?
Well, I'll get to that. So Thursday mornings, what we do is we go to the wine house early in the morning and we make the bread. So we take the bread starter.
Not that early. We're like 9 o'clock. Anyway,
no, we're out the door a lot earlier than that. So we take water, we take the yeast, our starter from the farm, but we also do use a little bit of commercial yeast. So we used a little bit of active dry yeast. I think personally that gives it a little better rise because without adding the commercial yeast, the bread tends to be a little, I don't know, it doesn't rise as well as I'd like it to. But it has I think our yeast gives it that flavor that the bread has. Otherwise, if we didn't use our yeast, I think it'd be pretty bland. And then we add the yeast, both yeasts, our farm starter and the commercial yeast, to water at room temperature. And we let it sit and bloom for maybe 15, 20 minutes or so. And then after that, I come back with a big sack of flour and pour a bunch of flour in there and then mix it together. And then you need to add salt as well. So we reserve a little bit of water and then add salt to the water and then heat it up on the stovetop or the microwave just to get the salt dissolved. And then we let that saline solution or salt solution cool to room temperature and let the bread add the saline solution to the bread that's been hydrated in about 30 minutes later. Because if you add the salt too quickly, then it's going to inhibit the yeast activity. So you need to let the bread go for about 30 minutes or so, 45 minutes, and then add the salt a little bit later on. And one thing I do differently than other people do, I dissolve the salt in the water because I think it distributes it a little more evenly. Instead of just sprinkling salt on the flour or the bread, I don't think it dissolves as well. I don't think it gives as good of a flavor. So I dissolve it in the water and then mix that in with the bread. And then what happens?
Well, wait a minute. So you have your yeast that you're refreshing. You've taken what, a quarter of it or an
No, I
eighth
just
third
used
of
the
it?
whole thing. So we store the starter in mason jars. So I just kind of fish it out with a fork, and then there's a little bit of sourdough starter left at the bottom of the mason jar, and I put a little bit of room temperature water in there, maybe about a cup or so, stir it up, and let it sit on the counter. So that's kind of what we do to refresh the yeast. So I'll take another clean mason jar, and I'll take maybe, I do this weight-based, so all the water and old yeast mixture that I stirred, I'll take maybe 250 grams of and put it into a new mason jar. And then I'll add some whole wheat flour to that, and I'll add the other bread flour into that, and I'll mix it up.
And then just let it sit on the counter.
Yeah, then I just let it sit on the counter, but I do put the cap back on. I screw the lid on, but I don't screw it on tightly, because if you were to screw it on tightly, it would probably explode, because you're starting to do the yeast fermentation and bacterial fermentation.
So you're building
that produces CO2.
Yeah.
So, and that's actually got to sit outside the fridge on the counter. I let it sit there during winter for at least overnight, so maybe 16 hours or so, even 24 hours. And the following day, it's probably tripled in size. And at that point, we put it back in the fridge, still loosely covered, and that's our starter for the following week.
Okay. And then when you're mixing the other stuff, then you leave it in the pan, and then we take turns, and every hour you're kind of moving the dough around, or you're blending the dough into itself?
Yeah, so initially it's really not, it's kind of a big shaggy mess. And as you said, we just kind of let it sit there covered after we put the salt water solution in there and the rest of the water, and let it sit for about an hour. Then either you and I will stir it for maybe up to 3 to 4 times. So while we're cooking up there the whole day, we'll stir it maybe every 1 or 3 to 4 times, and then we'll let it sit on the counter till, I don't know, maybe 12 or 1 o'clock. And at this time of year, we'll put it in the CSA cooler to cool it down. Otherwise, it'll over ferment by the time it hits the following day. So we'll pull it out probably around 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And the temp in the wine house is set to around 69, 70 degrees. So we'll pull it out in the mid to late afternoon, keep it covered, and let it sit there for the duration of the afternoon and evening and overnight.
But we can't turn the heat off, because if we turn the heat off, then we're jeopardizing our bread.
Right. So if we turn the heat off, it's not going to ferment as much, and it's not going to yield a complete fermentation, and it's not going to rise as well. So we have to let it sit at that certain temperature, and our key temperature right now is between 69 and 70 degrees, and that's going to change in summertime when we have the air conditioning on and temperatures are different, so we'd have to tweak things based on the temperatures. So we let it sit overnight, and what happens overnight, it's allowing the yeast and the lactobacillus, the bacteria, to do a slow fermentation. So the longer you let it sit there, the more flavors that are developed. And the slower the fermentation and the longer the fermentation, you get probably much more flavor out of the bread and more of a sour, more rustic component to it.
And can you let it sit? Can you over sit it? Like, is there a certain time frame that you are only allowed to let it sit for, or can you just let it sit for days, or what's the deal with that?
No, that's happened before. We let the starter go for a week, but obviously it's in the fridge at a lower temperature, so things are slowed down. But if I let it if we get there too late the following morning, if something happens, that's happened before, where we let it over ferment and the dough actually collapses on itself. So all the yeast are spent, and it's produced all the CO2, and they're tired, they're dead, and everything kind of collapses. It was at its maximal rise, and everything starts going back down again. So you just have to get it at that specific time frame where it's going to be almost completely fermented.
Okay. And then if it does over ferment, do you end up with flatbread?
You end up with a flatter bread. It doesn't rise, and it doesn't look well. But that would be kind of great for a crostini. So in crostini, you don't want a crumb, which is the interior of the bread after you bake it. You don't want a lot of different air pocket sizes. You don't want a heterogeneous crumb. You want something a little more homogeneous and structured in similar air pockets, where you're not going to put a ricotta or tomato on the crostini and it's going to fall right through the hole. So that would be a bad crostini. You want something with a tighter crumb that can actually hold the stuff you're going to put on there.
You're talking about crostini like to put stuff on, like a tapenade or a spread and stuff, right? But not the breadstick crostini.
No.
Okay.
The crostini we make.
Yeah. Okay.
So anyway, we get up there the following day, and I go up there before you do. I turn the oven on and that's another thing. You really got to play with your oven and know your oven and know what temperature is appropriate for it. So ours, we kind of crank up to the maximum to 550, get it really hot, and let it sit there for a good 45 minutes to an hour to preheat. and really get a high core temperature. And then I go there and take the bread dough out onto a floured surface, and I shape it and split it up into, usually you make little baguettes. So little baguettes are the long bread. And I let them sit on parchment-lined cookie sheets for about, I don't know, anywhere from 30 minutes to 50 minutes to relax the gluten so it can rise a little more appropriately and not spring back, and to do a secondary rise after that. And then what do? We put a little bit of flour on top for decoration purposes, and then we slash the dough. So the purpose of slashing a dough is to make sure that the dough doesn't, or the bread doesn't crack and just kind of form its own nooks and crannies. You're kind of guiding where the bread should expand. And it also makes a nice decoration. I think for when Mateo went to college, I made a nice little M, slashed a nice little M in his round loaf, and then we send that off with him.
And do you need to have a special tool to do the slashing, or can you just do it with a knife?
You're supposed to use a razor blade, but I found that the razor blade, for some reason, and even the sharp ones that we've gotten, just drag and don't make the appropriate cut. So I think the knives that we have, the really sharp serrated steak knives.
Okay.
And if you just kind of make a superficial cut by maybe maybe 5 millimeters or so, half a centimeter, and it makes a cleaner, better cut than the razor blade does.
Got it.
Then what do we do with the bread?
You just stick it in the oven.
We stick it in the oven, but we have a very high-tech steam injection system in our oven, don't we?
No, but that was what I was going to ask you. Do you need a special oven to bake bread in, or can you use your regular oven?
You can use your regular oven. So all the big bakeries have steam injection ovens. Okay. And so when you put the bread in, initially there's steam injected in there, because if it's too dry, then the bread won't rise appropriately. Okay. So if you have a more moist environment, then that'll allow the crust to expand a little bit before it starts really kind of crusting over and getting dry. So our very expensive high-tech system consists of getting a measuring cup of maybe about a quarter cup of water, and we've got a disposable aluminum pan on the bottom of the oven. So when I put the bread in there, I just take maybe a quarter cup of water and toss the water into the aluminum pan that's been preheated to 550 degrees for the last 45 minutes to 60 minutes. You look like you're falling asleep.
A little bit. Keep going.
Okay, stop falling asleep.
Keep going.
And that's it. We bake it for about 20 minutes, and then we flip it from top to bottom and turn it 180 degrees and bake it for another 15 minutes for a total of 35 minutes, and take it out. And then what? You're drinking. You're gulping your tea already.
Gulping my tea. We put it on a cookie sheet, like on a rack.
Okay, so why don't we keep it on the cookie sheets?
Because it'll continue cooking on the baking sheet. No?
No, if you keep it on the baking sheet, there's no air circulation, so it'll get a wet, soggy bottom. So you don't want to do that. You want to actually put it on a metal cookie sheet with holes in the bottom, so it actually gets air circulation and has time to cool appropriately and dry and not get a wet, soggy bottom.
But you forgot to tell them that you have to flip it and you have to change it top to bottom too, so that
I did say that. I think you were asleep in that
No,
portion.
you did not.
I did say that. You were sleeping.
Oh,
your eyes were
just not
glazing over, and you were sleeping during that part.
Well, we need to move on, but I wanted to. What else?
Well, before we get there, do you eat the bread right away or no?
I don't know. You told Massimo to wait 30 minutes just now.
Yeah, so you've got to wait at least 30 minutes to allow the bread to finish cooking. So because the bread actually continues to cook out of the oven as it cools. And I don't know if this is something that people made up, or I've heard it's illegal in France to cut into bread before a 30-minute time frame.
Oh.
So you've got to actually take it out, and you cannot touch it for 30 minutes. So I don't know if that's true or not, but it's something interesting.
Yeah, I know that we have stopped at many a
Boulangerie,
which is different than a pâtisserie in France because they can't bake bread at the same place they bake the pastries, but if they do, they call each other the same. They have two different names for it. So
and they'll get the bread police after them.
Yes, so you definitely, you definitely have to do that.
So this isn't something that takes us 2 hours of work. This is a week-long process.
Yeah.
Right?
So that's why we put a deadline on the orders for the bread so that we know how many loaves we need to make per week, so that we can anticipate and plan accordingly.
Yeah, so if we want it ready on Friday evening, we've got to stop the orders on Wednesdays so we know how much bread dough to make on Thursday morning, and then we have to let it rise and then start all over again. So it's a week-long process. It's not something short.
Yeah. And then what was the dough, the bread that you made that looked like a big pizza bread? That's from Tartine Bakery as well. That's from Chad Robertson. So now we're just it's just a different proportion or hydration of the dough to actually make the pizza dough. And it's a little more rustic. It's not quite a focaccia, but the focaccia bread, we forgot to mention that, but we won't go into that since the podcast is getting a little bit long. But the focaccia bread contains olive oil, and that's very different. So if you want to talk about focaccia another time, we can do that. Sure.
So let's get into the menu for next week.
Okay. Well, all I know is that people love our bread. And the reason we started selling it at the takeout menu option was because when people were in-house, they kept begging us to make bread for them and sell us the bread. And I think within the last year, I would say, if we had extra loaves on Saturday night, we would put it out there that they could buy a loaf if we had it. But we weren't planning on making bread as your mainstay income.
Yeah, so let's go back on that a little bit. So during the normal business hours on Fridays and Saturdays, we serve bread as an option for our appetizer plate. We can serve it with the meal if certain menus call for it.
Right.
But we typically slice it into big rustic chunks and put it on our cedar boards with olive oil and Parmesan cheese. We can serve it with or without. And that cost money to serve. So I think we had one customer write a Yelp review a long time ago that the bread wasn't free and why are we charging for the bread? And I almost started throwing knives at them. So we'll see. So the bread isn't free because it takes a week to make, and it's not Wonder Bread. It's not something we buy at the grocery store.
Right. And so we don't outsource the bread. And so with
Same reason we don't get free coffee either, because we source it locally and from good sources.
So with that being said,
I know I'm a meaner person than you are.
Yeah, you are. Okay. So with that said, the point being is that we will try to continue to offer bread when we can. It will just depend on our menus and what we need volume wise for the dinners on Friday and Saturdays, and then and we don't know what that will look like in the future. Whether we'll continue offering to put in your bread order ahead of time if you're coming for dinner on a Saturday night and you want to pick up a loaf or not. We haven't talked that through. So we'll just keep us posted if you're interested in that. The other thing I was going to say, was that we did offer, people have asked for a bread making course, and we did offer a cooking course in bread making. And just 2 quick comments on that. One, it totally stressed Mark out trying to put together a 2-hour cooking class for the bread making that takes a week long of preparing. And then 2, we found out that the folks that live in the city water is different than our well water. And so that messed with their starter that we sent them home with. And so that was interesting as well. Yeah, that was something we hadn't anticipated.
That's a good point, because their bread starter failed because we're on well water. We have it tested every year, but our water is not chlorinated. Right. So their water is chlorinated in the city. So if they have that, it may potentially destroy the yeast and bacteria or reduce the count significantly where they can't get a good fermentation off their starter. So we've got to get the
So anyway, so just to keep you guys posted on how much it takes to make the bread. Okay, so next weekend we are doing a what are we doing again? Minestrone and pork loin and almond cake, right? Yep. That's the menu for next weekend. I think minestrone, just this whole month is going to be Italian and French comfort food. From what I can remember, looking at the menus, it's just one of those great months that will tickle your belly as we stay in.
Tickle your belly.
Yeah. You tickle your belly when, you get excited about comfort food, about like feeling warm from the inside out. It's really nice.
All right, my belly doesn't get tickled.
Okay, whatever. Anyway, so minestrone, I don't know. I've always grown up with minestrone. I don't know, Mark, have you?
Yeah, it was a part of my childhood.
And we just ate it all the time. It's a cheap soup for my grandmothers to make.
Yeah, it's not a cheap soup for us to make.
It's not a cheap soup for us to make. It is because we grow a lot of it ourselves. But my grandmothers would throw whatever they had in. So minestrone looked very different from one week to the next from when my grandmothers were making it or my mom was making it, because it just depended what was in the fridge, vegetable-wise, and then they just threw it in there to make a good minestrone.
So actually, tilling the land, putting the seeds in, watching the zucchini grow, and harvesting them and putting them into soup.
That did not happen at my house.
Cheap? I don't think so.
No, that didn't happen at my house. Ours, we went to the grocery store. We lived in the city, and if we grew a couple of things and we threw them in there, so be it. But most of the stuff was store-bought and stuff. And I do remember most of our big occasion things that we went out to banquet halls for, weddings and funeral masses and anniversary parties and stuff. The first course was always minestrone.
Yeah, and it was good. And this is not a short process either. So,
oh, no, this is a long, yeah.
So I've kind of tweaked it. I'm not exactly sure how my grandmother used to make it or your family used to make it, but the way I've tweaked it is we create a base first. So we chop some onions or mince some onions, and then we put that with some olive oil, some tomato paste, some garlic, some red wine, and some herbs, and we soften that over the stove in a big pasta pot. And then we add a little bit of water and simmer that for a little bit of time. Then we use an immersion blender to blend all that stuff together and just make it into a thicker sauce. And from that point, we add water, and that's our stock base, in essence, our broth base to the minestrone. And then we'll cut our zucchini, our carrots, our potatoes, and celery, and put all that into the minestrone mixture.
I don't think we add celery.
We add celery sometimes. It all depends if we have it.
No, we add Swiss chard or kale.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah,
so we add
I don't
Swiss chard
think we
or kale.
do celery. I hate to break it to you.
So this week it's going to be our zucchini that we froze from last season. It's going to be our potatoes that we froze from last season. We'll probably end up using kale. So in the kale, you always kind of cut a little bit too big, so otherwise it's like hanging off the spoon. So you got to cut the kale a little bit smaller. So that all goes into the minestrone base, and that's simmered for a few hours. But you also have to do the beans. So the beans have to be prepared the day before because they have to soak and hydrate. What I like to do is take the beans, put them in a whole bunch of water, add salt in there, which actually gives some flavor to the beans, allow them to put them back in the fridge and allow them to expand and rehydrate over at least overnight, a 12-hour time frame. Take them back in the morning and then simmer them on the stove with a little bit of baking soda. And the baking soda decreases the chance that the beans are going to explode. It makes them keep their shape. I'm not quite sure what the science is behind that, but it does. And we simmer the beans until they're just about tender, not 100%.
Pork tender.
And then put them in the minestrone. The reason we don't put them in the minestrone initially is because that has tomato sauce and it's more acidic. And I think if you cook the beans in an acidic environment, from what I've learned and understand, that they won't cook as well. They won't. They'll still be hard and it'll take a very, very long time to cook the beans that way. And then by that time, the vegetables are overcooked. So this is not a short process either. Oh, and what else do we put in there that's special?
Oh, yeah. You put in a piece of the Parmesan rind.
Yeah.
And so then it's like a game. Who gets the Parmesan rind at the end? Like
it's
when
a
you
special
get it on
treat.
a little treat when you like find it on your spoon at the end.
Or is it more gross to get this globby piece of Parmesan?
I don't know. I love the taste of it, so I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah,
so.
That's kind of an old Italian nonna trick, just to put the Parmesan rind and not waste any food. You keep the Parmesan rind because it adds flavor to it.
To anything, to pasta sauces, to soups, to anything.
Yeah.
And then the main course is going...
Hold on. So when you serve the minestrone, you got to put a little bit of freshly grated Parmesan on it and the olive oil. But you need to put the olive oil on there first, extra virgin olive oil, and then the cheese, because it drives me nuts.
So there's additional grated Parmesan that you add to the soup at the end.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Are we good then?
Yep.
That was the first course.
That's
the second course.
And we're going to be making more for the to-go stores. We're going to make a huge batch next week.
We have plenty in the store. We'll talk.
We'll see.
We have plenty in the store.
By the time people listen to the podcast, we're going to be sold out. We're going to have to make more.
I don't know about that, but hopefully y'all will buy an extra container.
Y'all?
Okay.
You're going to make grits?
All will get to buy an extra container of minestrone for one of those quick and easy weekday meals.
Right.
So the main course is going to be a beautiful pork loin roast. And Mark was asking me earlier, when was the first time I was introduced to that? And I think that has always been a staple as one of the main courses for our, again, banquet meals. But at my dad's men's club in Illinois, that's one of their more popular main course dishes, is a nice roasted pork loin with some au jus and some roasted potatoes. And they do it very well there.
Yeah, the time I remember, I grew up with it too, but I think the time that we went to Italy as a whole kind of extended family with your parents and everything.
2000.
Yeah, and then we went from, we brought your father to our place in Tuscany.
We brought the whole family over to see the apartment in Solieta. Yes.
Yeah, but that travel time. So literally your family's home, your father's hometown and my family's hometown are 30 miles away. Linear miles away.
Yeah, and on a map they're like a teeny weeny little squidge. But the problem is that the Apennine mountain range runs between that teeny weeny little squidge that you see on the map.
Yeah, hopefully you're not my long lost cousin or something. That'd be kind of gross.
It could be, but anyway, keep going.
So the last time, do you want to get into the trip that we took?
No, just tell them where you saw the pork loin. Stay focused.
We went up the other way, up to the mountains, and I freaked out and I couldn't drive anymore because of the altitude. And
okay, that was with the kids. That has nothing to do with pork loin. Stay focused.
All right. Okay.
So tell them where you saw the pork loin.
So we drove from our place to your aunt's place in...
Oh my God, we're back to this. We disagree on how the trip went. But anyway, the point being is that my cousin Mauro, who was a bus driver, was told us he would take us to the apartment in Solieta. And as we're driving, there are 7 of us in the car. As we're driving through the mountain ranges, we kept asking him how much longer, and we're going up and up and up. And my cousin saying, "It's just right there. It's just right there." Well, we're still driving 3 hours later.
It was like key.
Well, yes, that's what he says in Italian. But and so we stopped somewhere along the trip. We were going to visit my great aunt Clementina in Italy, in Barga. On the way back or going, and whichever way it was, we stopped to a restaurant, and this is where Mark takes over.
Yeah, so we stopped halfway to the restaurant, and we had to go through these very narrow village streets with this van that your cousin was driving, and I think your dad took the mirror off because he just kind of forced it down that street and hit a building with it or something. Yep. But anyway, so we went in. There was this very rustic, family-run restaurant, very beautiful, and we had
the views were gorgeous.
Yeah, roasted pork loin and potatoes, similar to what we're doing, and it was very flavorful and really well done. So that's what I remember from the pork loin. So we're going to do that. So we're going to brine the pork loin.
And just a side note, what I remember from that trip was not the meal. I remember what the bathrooms look like. So just so y'all keep that in perspective.
Okay, you have a focus and I have another focus, exactly. I guess. You're happier in the bathroom and I'm happier cooking.
Well, anyway. I was less than happy with that bathroom, so I guess that was my focus.
Because it was just a hole in the floor?
Yes, it was the old Italian way of going to the bathroom.
Yeah,
anyway, almond cake is the dessert.
Well, anyway, back to the pork loin quickly. We're going to brine the pork loin and we're going to sous vide it for a period of time with a little bit of aromatics, some thyme and things like that. And then we're going to pan sear it and then cut it thinly and serve it to you with our roasted potatoes, maybe with a little bit of the potatoes will be roasted in duck fat, garlic, French thyme, and a little bit of salt. So it's going to be a nice meal. And then the almond cake. Go ahead.
And that's just a beautiful Italian dessert. Like I think we've said before, Italians aren't big on their desserts, but this was something that like I know both my grandmothers used to make and just have available when company would come over is, you know, bring out the almond cake and you would have slices and it was doled out. And the smaller you were, the smaller the slice you got. But it was more like a coffee cake kind of thing. But I love almond cake as a beautiful dessert no matter what.
So it's going to be...
Are we doing mascarpone whipping cream with that?
I don't know. I haven't decided.
Okay. Just checking.
We'll see. And then just to...
Powdered sugar would be nice too, just so you know.
Well, maybe I'll do powdered sugar. I'll probably do powdered sugar. Okay. You got to remind me.
With a raspberry sauce, do you think, or no?
We'll see. Just
keeping it real.
All right.
Okay.
What?
I mean, I'm just keeping you on your toes, trying to think of new ideas to go with these different things.
Yeah. Okay. Whatever. So anyway, the following week we're going to have braised pork shoulder again. And,
no, not again.
Not again.
The one is the pork loin. The other is the pork shoulder.
I know. We're not doing it, but we had it a month ago too. But that's fine. And then we're going to serve that over some cannellini beans that'll be nicely done. And then the following week we're going to do my deconstructed chicken pot pie.
Yummy. Both so good.
Yeah.
And then,
what do people want to hear? So what do you? We have a bunch of possible topics for future podcasts, but we'd also like to hear what you guys want us to discuss on the podcast.
Yeah. So go ahead and put it in the comment section of the YouTube channel or send us an email.
Put it in the comments.
Comment section.
Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Otherwise, no one's going to find us.
Oh, is that it?
Yeah, just the whole YouTube algorithm. So click the like. If you listen to it, hopefully click the like button unless you don't like it.
Oh, no, I didn't know that.
Put a comment in. Let us know what you think.
Click every time, like every video?
Yeah, like every video. Yes.
Oh.
Yeah, but you just have to subscribe once. So subscribe to the channel.
I don't know if I did subscribe or not. They keep bringing up something about subscribing free trial thing. What is that?
No, then you got to pay money after a while.
I don't want to do.
I'm too cheap to pay for anything. So,
all right. So, well, it's Valentine's Day this weekend.
It is.
So, the Bellazzinis, we don't celebrate Valentine's. Well, I got you chocolates. I got the family chocolates because I know my husband is not a romantic at heart. And so I get myself my own Valentine's thing, and I include the whole family in it. So Massimo, Mark, and I got infusion chocolates from Madison, which is one of my favorite chocolate stores in Madison.
I told you I would make you chocolates, but you didn't want to settle for that.
No, we know. Okay. Anyway, and then we sent Mateo a little gift to remind him that though he's not with us, we still love him dearly. And I sent my mom and dad a little something to let them know. So if you've got some friends, family, or neighbors that you're thinking about, just send them a quick note.
You're spending all this money, you're never going to remodel a house.
And
anyway,
so just keep them in mind and let them know that you are thinking of them and that spread the love is what I'm saying this weekend. So happy Valentine's Day, everybody.
Happy Valentine's Day, and we'll talk to you guys next week. Bye.
Bye.